James Bryant had seen things most people couldn't imagine. 12 years as a Navy SEAL meant 3 tours in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. He'd faced enemy fire, led rescue missions, and survived situations that would break most men. But nothing in his military career had prepared him for the phone call he was about to receive on that sunny Saturday afternoon in June. He and his wife, Dr. Nicole Bryant, had moved to their new home in a quiet North Carolina suburb 6 months earlier. It was everything they'd dreamed of during those long deployments overseas. A white picket fence, a big backyard, tree-lined streets where kids rode their bikes. Nicole had her own medical practice in town, treating children while James was adjusting to civilian life. He attended weekly counseling sessions with other veterans, trying to find his place in a world that suddenly felt too quiet, too normal. They were one of only 3 black families on their street. James had noticed the stares when they first moved in, the way some neighbors suddenly remembered they had somewhere to be when Nicole waved hello, the cold shoulders at the homeowners association meeting, but he'd dealt with prejudice before. He figured people would warm up eventually. They'd see that he and Nicole were just regular people who wanted a peaceful life. That Saturday, James was at his weekly veterans group therapy session across town. These sessions were important to him. Transitioning from combat zones to suburban life wasn't easy, and talking with other veterans who understood helped. He'd silenced his phone as usual, focusing on the discussion about readjusting to family life after years of deployment. Meanwhile, Nicole was home alone, working in her garden. She loved growing vegetables and flowers, finding peace in the simple act of nurturing life. She was wearing her old college t-shirt and garden gloves, kneeling by her tomato plants, when she heard the aggressive pounding on the front door. The sound was violent, angry, not the knock of a neighbor asking to borrow sugar or a delivery driver with a package. Nicole pulled off her gloves and walked through the house, her heart already beating faster. Something felt wrong. Through the peephole, she saw 3 young men on her porch. They wore leather jackets despite the summer heat, and their faces were twisted with an expression she recognized immediately as hatred. Before she could step back, before she could reach for her phone, the door exploded inward. They'd kicked it with such force that the deadbolt tore right through the frame. Nicole screamed and stumbled backward as the 3 men pushed inside her home. The leader had a spiderweb tattoo crawling up his neck. He pointed at Nicole with a scarred hand and started yelling slurs that made her blood run cold. Words she hadn't heard since childhood, words that reduced her to nothing but the color of her skin. The other 2 spread out, one blocking the path to the kitchen, the other heading toward the living room. Nicole tried to stay calm. Her hands shook as she raised them. "Please, just leave. I'll give you whatever you want. Money, jewelry, anything." The leader laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through her home. "We don't want your money. We want you gone. You and your husband don't belong here. This is our neighborhood and we're taking it back." One of the men grabbed a lamp and smashed it against the wall. The other started spray painting on her cream-colored walls. Horrible words. Hateful symbols. Nicole watched in horror as they destroyed her living room, the space she and James had carefully decorated, where they'd hosted their first dinner party just last month. She tried to run for the back door, but the leader caught her arm and shoved her hard against the wall. Her head cracked against the drywall, stars exploding in her vision. She could smell alcohol on his breath as he leaned close. "You've got 1 week to pack up and get out. If you're still here next Saturday, we're coming back. And next time, your husband better be home too. We'll burn this whole place down with both of you inside. Tell the cops if you want, we don't care. They can't protect you." The 3 men laughed as they continued their destruction. They flipped over her coffee table, kicked holes in the walls, and dumped out drawers. The whole attack lasted maybe 10 minutes, but to Nicole it felt like hours. Finally, they headed toward the broken door, leaving destruction in their wake. The leader turned back one more time. 1 week? If you're smart, you'll be gone in 3 days. Then they were gone, their laughter fading as they climbed into a truck parked down the street. Nicole stood frozen for a moment, trembling violently before her training as a doctor kicked in. She needed to think clearly, document everything, get help. Her phone was in the kitchen. With shaking hands, she grabbed it and immediately called 911. The dispatcher's calm voice helped ground her as she reported the home invasion. Then, still on the line with 911, she called James. He answered on the second ring. "Hey honey, session just ended. I'm heading to the car now." "James," her voice cracked, barely a whisper. "Nicole, What's wrong? His tone shifted instantly, the casual warmth replaced by alert concern. 3 men broke into our house. They pushed me, destroyed everything. They said we have to leave or they'll come back and burn the house down with us in it. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then James's voice came back, completely controlled but with an edge that Nicole recognized from his military days. Are they still there? No, they left maybe 2 minutes ago. Are you hurt? I hit my head, but I'm okay. I want you to lock every door and window right now. The police are coming. Yes, I'm on with 911 right now. Good, I'll be there in 15 minutes. Stay on the phone with them until the police arrive. I'm coming home right now. Nicole heard his car start in the background, the engine roaring to life. She sank down onto the kitchen floor, still shaking, and pulled her knees to her chest. The 911 dispatcher kept talking to her, asking questions, keeping her focused. In the distance, she could hear sirens approaching. James drove faster than he should have, his mind racing. He'd spent years protecting his country, his team, his brothers in arms. He'd cleared buildings and hunted dangerous men across deserts and mountains. But someone had just invaded his home. Someone had put their hands on his wife. Someone had threatened to burn them alive. The combat training he'd worked so hard to leave behind came flooding back. His hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough that his knuckles turned white. He forced himself to breathe slowly, deeply. He needed to think clearly, not react from rage. Rage got people killed. Rage made mistakes. He'd learned that lesson in places most people would never see. By the time he pulled into his driveway, 2 police cars were already there. He saw Nicole through the front window, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm weather, talking to uniformed officers. The sight of her like that, traumatized in her own home, made something cold and hard settle in his chest. He walked into his house and immediately assessed the damage. The broken door, the spray paint covering his walls with hateful messages, his furniture destroyed, his wife's face pale with shock. This wasn't just a crime. This was a declaration of war. James had fought wars before. He knew how they started, how they escalated, and how they ended. As he held Nicole close and listened to her tell the officers what happened, a plan was already forming in his mind. These men had made a critical error. They'd assumed they were dealing with an easy target, someone who would be too scared to fight back. They had no idea who they'd just threatened. They didn't know that the man whose home they'd invaded had spent over a decade hunting the most dangerous people on Earth. They didn't know that every skill he'd learned in the SEALs, every tactic, every strategy was about to be turned on them. But they would learn. Soon enough, they would learn. The police spent 3 hours at the Bryant home that evening, photographing everything, taking statements, and collecting evidence. Detective Linda Foster, a woman in her late 40s with sharp eyes and graying hair, led the investigation. She'd been with the department for 20 years and had seen plenty of hate crimes, but something about this case bothered her more than usual. Maybe it was the calculated nature of the attack, or the specific threats made, or the way these men had felt comfortable enough to do this in broad daylight. James sat next to Nicole on their couch, his arm around her shoulders as she went through the story again for the detective. He noticed details she was too shaken to mention. The way the men had moved through the house suggested they'd done this before. The specific 1-week deadline wasn't random. The threat about burning the house was meant to terrify them into leaving quickly, without fighting back. Detective Foster reviewed the security camera footage that James's system had captured. He'd installed it 2 months ago. High-quality cameras covering every angle of the property. Military habits died hard, and he'd never felt quite comfortable without knowing what was happening around his perimeter. Now he was grateful for that paranoia. The footage was crystal clear. 3 men approaching the house, their faces visible. The license plate of their truck. Even audio of their threats. Detective Foster nodded approvingly. This is excellent evidence. We'll have these men identified and arrested within 48 hours. I promise you both. After the police left, Nicole finally broke down. The shock wore off and the reality hit her. She cried in James's arms, her whole body shaking. I don't feel safe here anymore. Oh. Home doesn't feel like home. James held her tight, his jaw clenched. I know, but we're not letting them win. We're not running. That night, after Nicole finally fell into an exhausted sleep with the help of medication from her own medical bag, James sat in his home office. The room was dark except for the glow of his computer screen. Sleep wasn't coming for him anyway. Too much adrenaline, too many thoughts racing through his mind. He opened his laptop and started working. Years of intelligence gathering in the military had taught him how to find information that most people couldn't. He knew how to use databases, how to cross-reference social media, how to track digital footprints. Within an hour, he had names: Derek Mason, the leader with the spiderweb tattoo, 26 years old, multiple arrests for assault and drug possession, known member of a white supremacist gang that operated across 3 counties. His social media was full of hateful propaganda and barely veiled threats: Tyler Brooks and Shane Garrett. The other 2 attackers. Both had criminal records stretching back to their teenage years. Assault, vandalism, weapons charges. They'd been in and out of jail, but never for very long. The system kept letting them out, and they kept hurting people. James dug deeper. He found something that made his blood run cold. This wasn't their first attack. Over the past 18 months, 6 other families had reported similar incidents in surrounding neighborhoods. Different houses, same pattern. Minority families moving into predominantly white areas, then facing escalating harassment that culminated in violent home invasions. Every family had moved away within weeks. None of those cases had resulted in serious charges. Witnesses were too scared to testify. Evidence was circumstantial. The gang operated with a sense of impunity because they'd learned the system's weaknesses. They knew that fear was their greatest weapon. James spent the entire night researching. He mapped out the gang's structure, identified their meeting places, tracked their movements through social media posts and public records. By dawn, he had a complete intelligence profile that would have impressed his old SEAL commanders. But he also discovered something troubling. The gang was planning to expand their operations. Social media chatter suggested they were organizing something bigger for the following weekend. Not just another isolated attack, but a coordinated action against multiple families. They wanted to send a message that would scare every minority family out of the suburbs. As the sun rose, James heard Nicole stirring in the bedroom. He closed his laptop and went to check on her. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying. He made her breakfast, held her hand, and told her that everything would be okay. But inside, he was already planning his next moves. Detective Foster called that afternoon with updates. "We've identified all 3 suspects and obtained warrants for their arrest. We're coordinating with the sheriff's department to pick them up today." James thanked her, but he didn't feel relieved. Something told him it wouldn't be that simple. He was right. That evening, Detective Foster called back with frustration clear in her voice. "They're gone." When officers went to their known addresses, the locations were empty. Neighbors said they saw them packing up yesterday evening. "We think someone tipped them off." "Someone inside?" James asked. "Possibly. Or they have police scanners. Either way, they knew we were coming, and they ran. We've issued APBs across the region. But these guys know how to disappear. Could take weeks to find them." After hanging up, James made a decision. He couldn't wait weeks. Not with the threat hanging over his family. Not with other families potentially in danger. He picked up his phone and started making calls to numbers he hadn't dialed in over a year. The first call was to Rodriguez, his former team leader who now ran a security consulting firm in Virginia. "I need help. Personal situation. Can you come?" Rodriguez didn't hesitate. "Give me an address. I'll be there tomorrow morning." The second call was to Thompson, a surveillance expert who'd saved James's life in Afghanistan. "How fast can you get to North Carolina with your gear?" "Depends. What are we hunting?" "Bad guys on home soil this time. I'll catch the first flight out." 3 more calls. 3 more teammates who'd been through hell with him and would walk through fire if he asked. By midnight, he had 5 former SEALs committed to arriving within the next 2 days. Nicole found him in his office, phone in hand, laptop open with maps and photos covering the screen. "James, what are you doing?" He turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen since his military days. Focus, purpose, determination. "I'm making sure these men never threaten anyone again." The police are doing their job, but their hands are tied by procedures and laws. I understand that, and I respect it. But I also know how to find people who don't want to be found. I know how to gather evidence that will stand up in any court. And I know how to do it legally. Nicole sat down across from him. "You're going after them. I'm going to help the police catch them, but on my terms, using my skills. Some friends are coming to help. We're not going to hurt anyone or break any laws. We're just going to make sure justice actually happens." She studied his face for a long moment. Be careful. I can't lose you. You won't. I didn't survive 12 years as a SEAL just to get taken down by some wannabe tough guys. But I need to do this, Nicole. Not just for us, but for every family they've terrorized. Over the next 2 days, James's house became an operations center. His former teammates arrived one by one, each bringing specialized skills and equipment. Rodriguez brought tactical surveillance gear. Thompson had tracking devices and communication equipment. Mitchell specialized in digital intelligence. Patterson was an expert in close protection. Williams knew more about legal procedures and evidence collection than most lawyers. They set up in James's garage, converting it into a command center that would have impressed any law enforcement agency. Multiple monitors displayed maps, social media feeds, and security camera footage from around the neighborhood. Detective Foster visited on the second day. James was honest with her about what he was planning. We're going to find these men and gather evidence of their activities. Everything we do will be legal. When we locate them, we'll contact you immediately. We're not vigilantes, we're just using our skills to help. Foster looked around the garage, saw the level of professionalism, and made a decision. Officially, I can't condone this. Unofficially, I'm glad you know what you're doing. These men need to be stopped, and frankly, you have resources we don't. Just promise me you'll keep me in the loop. You have my word. The team worked around the clock, tracking digital footprints, monitoring known associates, and piecing together the gang's operations. They discovered the scope was even bigger than James had initially thought. This wasn't just a local problem. The gang was connected to a regional network of white supremacist groups, sharing tactics and coordinating activities. Thompson picked up chatter suggesting the gang was still planning their big coordinated action for the upcoming weekend. They'd gone underground but hadn't abandoned their plans. If anything, the police pressure had made them more determined to follow through. James gathered his team in the garage. They're planning something for Saturday night. Multiple targets, multiple crews. We need to locate their staging area and figure out their specific plans. Rodriguez leaned forward. What's the play? James pulled up a map on the main monitor. We make ourselves the target. Let them come to us, but this time we'll be ready. We document everything, we let them incriminate themselves, and we hand them over to the police with evidence so airtight that no lawyer in the world can get them off. Williams nodded slowly. You want to set a trap? Exactly. But we need to be smart about it. Legal, documented, and coordinated with law enforcement. We're not operating in a combat zone. We're in North Carolina, and we do this by the book. The team spent the next day planning every detail. They would create a scenario that would draw the gang out, give them enough rope to hang themselves, and ensure that when the police arrived, they'd find everything they needed for prosecution. James contacted Detective Foster and laid out the plan. She was quiet for a long moment, then said, "This is either brilliant or crazy, maybe both. But if it works, we could shut down this entire operation and make the biggest hate crime bust this county has ever seen. That's the idea." Okay, I'll have units standing by. But James, if anything goes wrong, if anyone gets hurt, nothing will go wrong. This is what we do. What we used to do, we plan, we execute, and we complete the mission. As Friday evening approached, everything was in place. The trap was set, the team was positioned, and law enforcement was coordinated. James stood in his living room, looking at the spray-painted walls they hadn't yet cleaned. Soon those hateful words would be covered over. Soon the men who'd terrorized his wife would face real justice. Nicole came to stand beside him. Are you sure about this? He took her hand. I've never been more sure of anything. Tomorrow night this ends, the plan had to be perfect. James knew from experience that operations lived or died in the details, and this one had to go exactly right. Too many lives depended on it, including his own family's safety. Friday morning started with a final briefing in the garage. The 5 former SEALs sat around a folding table covered with maps, photos, and equipment lists. James stood at the whiteboard he'd set up, markers in different colors tracking each phase of the operation. Phase 1, he began, pointing to the timeline. We let word spread through the community that Nicole went to stay with her sister in Atlanta. I'm supposedly here alone, too scared to sleep in my own house. We've already started the rumor through 3 different sources that the gang monitors. Rodriguez nodded. Mitchell confirmed they picked up on it. Their social media shows increased activity. They're talking. Good. Phase 2 begins this afternoon. I make myself visible around town. Go to the grocery store, the gas station, the hardware store. I want to look nervous, distracted, like a man who's jumping at shadows. Thompson smiled slightly. That should bring them out. They're already emboldened. An easy target will be too tempting. Exactly. Now, phase 3 is where we need absolute precision. James pulled up a detailed diagram of his property. We have 12 possible entry points to the house. Rodriguez and Patterson, you're in the attic with thermal imaging and recording equipment. Thompson and Williams, you're in the basement with additional cameras and comms. Mitchell, you're in the neighbor's tree line with the drone and long-range surveillance. He marked positions on the map with red dots. Every angle is covered. Every approach has overlapping fields of view. We document everything from multiple sources. Time-stamped, high definition, admissible in court. Williams raised a concern that had been bothering him. What if they bring more people than we expect? The initial attack was 3 men, but if they're planning something bigger? Good question. Intel suggests they might bring anywhere from 6 to 15 people. Our home security system has been upgraded with sensors that will give us an exact count as they approach. If numbers exceed 12, we abort and call in immediate police response. We're not equipped to handle a small army, and we're not trying to be heroes. This is about evidence collection. Detective Foster had provided them with direct communication to the police tactical response team. James showed the team the dedicated emergency channel they'd use. One button, immediate response. Police are staged 3 minutes away. FBI has agreed to have a team on standby as well, given the hate crime implications. Patterson checked his watch. What's our timeline? They've been tracking a pattern. Previous attacks happened late at night between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. That's when neighborhoods are asleep and response times are slowest. I expect them tonight, probably around midnight. That gives us all day to prepare and position. The team spent the morning doing final equipment checks. Every camera was tested, every battery charged, every communication device verified. They ran through contingency plans for a dozen different scenarios. What if the gang brought weapons? What if they tried to burn the house immediately? What if they split up and approached from unexpected angles? James had answers for everything. Years of planning missions in hostile territory had taught him to think 3 steps ahead. He'd learned from the best, and now he was applying those lessons to protect his home. That afternoon, he played his part perfectly. He drove to the grocery store, looking over his shoulder repeatedly in the parking lot. At the gas station, he fumbled with his wallet, dropped his credit card, seemed distracted and nervous. He knew the gang had eyes everywhere, people watching and reporting back. At the hardware store, he bought heavy-duty locks and security bars for windows, making a show of asking the clerk about alarm systems. The clerk, who was in on the plan after Detective Foster briefed him, played along perfectly, recommending products in a loud voice that anyone nearby could hear. Yeah, these will keep anyone from breaking in. Had a lot of folks getting these lately, especially after those home invasions in the area. Smart move protecting yourself. James noticed a young man with gang tattoos in the next aisle, clearly listening. Perfect. The bait was taken. By evening, Nicole had actually left for her sister's house, along with their dog. James insisted on it. No matter how well planned the operation, he wouldn't risk her being anywhere near if something went wrong. She'd argued at first, but eventually understood. Some battles required distance, not presence. Call me the second it's over, she made him promise. The second, he agreed, kissing her goodbye. As darkness fell, the team moved into position. Rodriguez and Patterson climbed into the attic through a hidden access panel, settling in with their equipment among the insulation and support beams. They had sleeping bags, food, water, and enough battery power to run their surveillance gear for 48 hours if needed. Thompson and Williams entered the basement through an exterior door, securing it behind them. They set up in a corner, behind the water heater, with clear sight lines to the basement stairs and additional equipment monitoring the first floor. Mitchell took the longest to position. He had to move through the neighbor's yard, 2 properties over, and climb into a massive oak tree that provided perfect elevation and concealment. His drone was ready to launch, equipped with night vision and thermal imaging. James stayed in the house, moving through rooms and occasionally turning lights on and off, creating the appearance of a nervous man unable to sleep. He'd change the curtains to thinner material that would show his silhouette clearly from outside. Anyone watching would see him pacing, sitting down, getting up, checking windows. At 10 p.m., all team members reported ready status. Everything was in position. Now came the hardest part of any operation: waiting. James sat in his living room, a book in his hands that he wasn't really reading. His earpiece kept him connected to the team, their occasional check-ins confirming everything was quiet. Through the windows, the suburban street looked peaceful. Porch lights glowed. A cat wandered across a lawn. Someone's television flickered behind curtains 3 houses down. 11 o'clock passed, then 11:30. James forced himself to stay calm, to trust the intelligence they'd gathered. The gang operated on patterns, and patterns were predictable. At 11:47, Mitchell's voice came through the earpiece, calm but alert. "We have movement. 3 vehicles approaching from the south, lights off. They just turned onto Maple Street." James's heart rate barely changed. Years of training kept his body under control, even as adrenaline flooded his system. "Copy, count." Vehicles stopping 2 blocks out. Occupants exiting, counting now. 12 individuals, all male, various ages. They're gearing up. I can see weapons, baseball bats, chains, and confirm at least 2 are carrying containers, possibly accelerants. More than James expected, but within the contingency plans. "Rodriguez, Patterson, you have visual?" Thermal imaging confirms 12 bodies approaching on foot. They're spreading out, attempting to surround the property. Looks like they've done this before. "Williams, Thompson?" "Basement is secure. All recording equipment active. We're ready." James stood and walked to the kitchen, making sure his silhouette was visible through the window. He wanted them to know exactly where he was. Let them feel confident. Let them think this would be easy. The power suddenly cut out, plunging the house into darkness. James had expected this and switched to night vision goggles he'd kept ready. On his thermal display, he could see the gang members moving closer, converging on the house from multiple directions. Rodriguez's voice. "They cut the main line. Backup generators are standing by but holding as planned. You're officially dark." "Perfect. Let them think they have the advantage." Through his night vision, James watched the gang approach. They moved. With surprising coordination, hand signals passing between groups. Some of them had military or police training, he realized. That made them more dangerous but also more predictable. The front door burst open, kicked in exactly as it had been the first time. James had deliberately left it with the same weak frame, making it an easy entry point. Derek Mason entered first, baseball bat in hand, the spiderweb tattoo on his neck visible even in the darkness. "Come out!" Derek's voice echoed through the house. "Time to finish what we started." The gang spread through the first floor, confident and loud. They were laughing, calling out threats, smashing furniture. James remained in the kitchen, hidden in shadows, watching them through a crack in the pantry door. Every word they said was being recorded on multiple devices. Every face was captured on camera from multiple angles. "Check upstairs," Derek ordered. "Find him." 4 gang members headed upstairs while the rest continued destroying the first floor. Through his earpiece, James heard Rodriguez confirm they had clear footage of the intruders in the upper level, documenting their weapons and actions. One gang member entered the kitchen where James was hidden, looking around with a flashlight. James could have taken him down silently, but that wasn't the mission. The mission was documentation, evidence that would stand up in federal court. The gang member moved past the pantry without seeing James and headed back to the living room. "Kitchen's clear." "He's not here," one of them shouted. "He must have ran." Derek's voice was angry. "Then we burn it down anyway. Send the message." "My gun." This was the moment. James pressed the button on his phone that simultaneously alerted all team members and sent an emergency signal directly to Detective Foster's response team. "All units, go time," he said quietly into his mic. "They've threatened arson. Police are 3 minutes out." What happened next was executed with the precision of a military operation. Rodriguez and Patterson activated powerful LED floodlights they'd positioned in the attic, flooding the house with blinding white light. At the same moment, Thompson and Williams activated exterior lights around the property, illuminating every approach and exit. The gang members stumbled back, shouting in confusion, temporarily blinded by the sudden illumination. Through hidden speakers, Rodriguez played a recorded message James had prepared. "You are trespassing on private property. You are being recorded from multiple angles. Law enforcement has been notified. Exit the premises immediately or you will be apprehended." The gang members panicked. Some ran for the doors. Others stood frozen, trying to understand what was happening. Derek yelled for them to stick together, but discipline broke down quickly. These weren't trained operators, just bullies who'd never faced real opposition. James emerged from the kitchen, now wearing a visible body camera in addition to his night vision goggles. "Nobody moves. You're surrounded, you're recorded, and the police are 90 seconds away." Derek spun to face him, bat raised. For a moment, they locked eyes. The gang leader saw something in James's expression that made him hesitate. This wasn't fear he was looking at. This was a trained warrior who'd been in real combat, who'd faced real enemies. Derek was holding a baseball bat. James's hands were empty, but he looked far more dangerous. "You should have taken the week we gave you," Derek snarled, trying to save face in front of his crew. "You gave me motivation," James replied calmly. "See, you thought you were attacking a scared civilian, but you forgot to check who you were threatening. 12 years, Navy SEAL. I've tracked terrorists through mountains and cities. You think I couldn't find you?" The sound of sirens filled the air, getting rapidly closer. Multiple vehicles approaching from all directions. The gang realized their mistake too late. Every exit was now blocked by their own vehicles and incoming police cars. James's team emerged from their positions. 5 former Special Operations soldiers, each one moving with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. They didn't draw weapons or make threats. They simply positioned themselves at key locations, blocking escape routes, herding the gang members together like sheep. When the police cars screamed into the driveway, lights blazing, Detective Foster emerged with a tactical team behind her. She surveyed the scene with barely concealed amazement. All 12 gang members were contained in James's living room, surrounded, with no weapons within reach and nowhere to run. "Detective Foster," James said calmly, "I'd like to report a home invasion, attempted arson, and conspiracy to commit hate crimes. I have documentation from 6 different cameras, audio recordings from multiple sources, and 12 witnesses who brought the evidence with them." Derek Mason stood in the center of his gang, finally understanding what had happened. They'd walked straight into a trap. Every word, every threat, every action had been recorded. They'd brought weapons and accelerants, proving intent. They'd confessed their plans on camera. They were finished, and they knew it. The next hour moved like a well-choreographed dance. Police officers flooded the property, taking the 12 gang members into custody one by one. Each suspect was photographed, their weapons cataloged, their rights read. Detective Foster moved through the scene with her team, documenting every detail, collecting every piece of evidence. James stood on his front porch, watching it all unfold. Rodriguez came to stand beside him, arms crossed, a slight smile on his face. That went better than expected. No injuries, perfect documentation, clean apprehension. "It's not over yet," James replied. This was the easy part. Now comes the legal battle. But he didn't know just how right he was, or how much bigger this would become. FBI agent Carson arrived within 30 minutes, having been monitoring the situation from the command vehicle parked 3 blocks away. He was a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes that took in every detail. He approached James with an extended hand. "Mr. Bryant, that was impressive work. Detective Foster briefed me on your background, but even so, the execution here was textbook. We've been tracking this gang for 2 years, trying to build a case that would stick. You just handed us everything we needed on a silver platter." James shook his hand. "I just wanted to protect my family and my home. You did more than that. Come with me, I want to show you something." Agent Carson led James to a mobile command center parked down the street. Inside was sophisticated computer equipment and several other agents working at terminals. Carson pulled up files on the main screen. "We've been investigating a network of white supremacist groups operating across 5 states. They've been coordinating attacks on minority families, using intimidation to create white zones in suburban areas. We knew the structure existed but couldn't prove coordination or get evidence of conspiracy. He clicked through photos and documents. James recognized several faces from his own research. Derek Mason and his crew are just one cell. There are 14 others we've identified, maybe more we haven't. They use encrypted communications, operate in small groups, and keep their activities below federal radar. Until tonight. Carson pulled up recordings from James's surveillance system. Your cameras caught something we didn't expect. Look at this conversation right before they entered your house. The footage showed Derek talking on his phone outside the property. The audio quality was excellent thanks to the directional microphones Rodriguez had placed. Derek was clearly receiving instructions from someone else, someone higher up the chain. The voice on the other end was giving specific orders about the attack, mentioning other targets, coordinating timing with other cells. That phone call connects this attack to the larger network, Carson explained. With your permission to use this evidence, we can trace those communications, identify the leadership, and bring down the entire organization. We're talking about preventing dozens of future attacks, maybe saving lives. James didn't hesitate. You have my complete cooperation. Whatever you need. By dawn, the full scope was becoming clear. The FBI's cybercrimes unit had traced Derek's phone records and found connections to 47 different individuals across multiple states. The network was larger and more organized than anyone had realized. James's operation hadn't just stopped one gang. It had exposed an entire domestic terrorism network. Detective Foster came by the house at sunrise, bringing coffee and looking exhausted but satisfied. The district attorney is filing charges in the morning. Every single one of those 12 men is facing federal hate crimes charges, conspiracy, attempted arson, home invasion, and assault. With your evidence, the DA says it's the strongest case she's seen in 20 years. What about bail? James asked. Federal prosecutor is arguing no bail due to flight risk and danger to the community. Given that they were caught in the act with weapons and accelerants planning to burn down your house, I'd say the judge will agree. Nicole came home that afternoon. She walked through the house, seeing the damage that had been repaired overnight by James's team and some neighbors who'd volunteered. The spray paint was gone, covered by fresh paint. The broken door had been replaced. New furniture was being delivered. She found James in the backyard staring at her garden. He looked tired but at peace. She wrapped her arms around him from behind. Is it really over? The immediate danger, yes. The larger fight is just beginning. But we're safe now, and we made sure a lot of other families will be safe too. The trial started 3 months later. The courtroom was packed every day, with news media covering every moment. The evidence James and his team had gathered was overwhelming. Hour after hour of video footage showing the gang members breaking in, making threats, carrying weapons, planning violence. Audio recordings of their conversations, including the phone call that linked them to the larger network. The defense attorneys tried everything. They claimed entrapment, but the judge shut that down immediately. James hadn't lured anyone into committing crimes. He'd simply documented crimes they were already planning. They argued the surveillance was illegal, but every piece of equipment had been on James's own property or used with his neighbor's explicit permission. Everything was completely legal. Derek Mason's attorney made one last desperate attempt, trying to paint his client as misguided rather than malicious. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Angela Reeves, destroyed that narrative with one question. Mr. Mason, when you kicked in the Bryant's door that first time and assaulted Dr. Bryant, what was your intent? Derek, coached by his lawyer, tried to minimize. Just wanted them to leave the neighborhood. By force? By violence? By threatening to burn them alive in their own home? We weren't really going to do that. Prosecutor Reeves pulled up the video from the second attack. This is you, correct? Carrying a container of gasoline into the Bryant home? Silence. This is you telling your associates to burn it down, correct? More silence. This is you coordinating with a known terrorist organization to attack multiple families across 3 counties on the same night, correct? Derek's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The jury had seen everything. They'd watched the videos, heard the threats, seen the weapons. More importantly, they'd heard from other families who'd been terrorized by the same gang, people who'd moved away in fear, lost businesses, lived with trauma. Nicole testified about the assault, the terror, the violation of feeling unsafe in her own home. Her testimony was powerful and emotional, and several jury members were seen wiping tears. James testified about his military service, his decision to use his skills to protect not just his family but his community, and his careful coordination with law enforcement to ensure everything was done legally. When asked why he didn't just move away like the gang demanded, his answer was simple. Because I spent 12 years defending this country's freedoms. I wasn't going to let some bullies tell me I couldn't live in my own home because of the color of my skin. That's not what America is supposed to be. That's not what I fought for. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Guilty on all counts for all 12 defendants. Derek Mason received 25 years in federal prison. The others received sentences ranging from 8 to 20 years. With federal sentencing guidelines, they'd serve at least 85% of those sentences with no chance of early parole. But the impact went far beyond those 12 convictions. The FBI used the evidence and connections to launch Operation Homestead, a nationwide sweep targeting the white supremacist network. Over the next 6 months, 47 additional arrests were made. The network's leadership was exposed and prosecuted. Safe houses were raided. Communication channels were shut down. Agent Carson told James that the operation had prevented an estimated 35 planned attacks on minority families across the country. Lives were saved because James had refused to be a victim and had instead turned his military training into community protection. The publicity around the case had unexpected consequences. James started receiving calls from other communities facing similar threats. Veterans organizations reached out. Civil rights groups wanted to learn his methods. Police departments asked for consultations on how to better protect vulnerable communities. 6 months after the trial, James and Nicole hosted an event at their home. They called it a community protection workshop. Over 200 people attended, including veterans, police officers, community activists, and concerned citizens. James and his former SEAL teammates taught legal surveillance techniques, coordination with law enforcement, evidence collection, and nonviolent intervention strategies. The key, James explained to the crowd, is that we're not vigilantes. We work with the system, not against it. We use our skills to gather evidence that authorities can use. We protect ourselves and our neighbors within the bounds of the law. That's what makes this effective and sustainable. Rodriguez, Thompson, and the others shared their expertise. They showed how to set up affordable security systems, how to document incidents properly, how to communicate effectively with law enforcement. Most importantly, they emphasized community cooperation. Hate groups thrive on isolation and fear, Rodriguez told the audience. They target people they think are alone and vulnerable. When communities unite, when neighbors protect neighbors regardless of race or background, these groups lose their power. The workshop became a quarterly event, then monthly. Then it evolved into a full nonprofit organization that James named Shield and Protect. They trained community watch groups, worked with police departments, and provided security consultations to families facing threats. Nicole expanded her medical practice to include trauma counseling for hate crime victims. She partnered with therapists and social workers to create a comprehensive support system. Physical safety is only part of healing, she told James. People need emotional support too. Local businesses stepped up. The hardware store where James had bought his security equipment offered discounts to families installing safety measures. Insurance companies provided reduced rates for homes with proper documentation systems. Neighbors who'd been silent before now formed active community protection networks. The spray-painted walls in James's home had been replaced with something better. Nicole commissioned a local artist to create a mural in their living room. It showed hands of different colors joined together, forming an unbreakable circle. Above it, words in bold letters: "This is home, this is community. This is strength." Detective Foster became a regular visitor and close friend. She worked with Shield and Protect to develop better protocols for law enforcement response to hate crimes. James showed us that civilians and police can work together more effectively than either can work alone, she said at a city council meeting. We need to embrace that partnership. The neighborhood transformed. What had been a place of silent prejudice became a model of integration and mutual protection. New families moving in were welcomed with neighborhood parties. Security cameras were visible on most homes, not as a sign of fear but as a statement. We watch out for each other here. 1 year after the attack, on the anniversary of that terrible Saturday when 3 men had kicked in their door, James and Nicole stood in their backyard. The garden had grown beautiful, vegetables thriving, flowers blooming. Neighbors gathered for a barbecue, kids playing, adults talking and laughing. James put his arm around Nicole. You know what's strange? If those men hadn't attacked us, none of this would exist. The nonprofit, the community network, all the families we've helped. Nicole leaned her head on his shoulder. I wouldn't say I'm grateful for what happened, but I'm proud of what you did with it. You turned hate into hope. We turned it into hope. All of us together. That evening, as the sun set and the last guests left, James received a call from Agent Carson. Wanted to give you an update. Remember how we traced that phone call Derek made? We just arrested the regional coordinator for the network. He was planning a major operation for next month. Because of your evidence chain, we stopped it before it started. James felt a weight lift that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. How many families? We estimate 12 families were targeted. You saved them all. After hanging up, James sat on his porch and looked at his home. The same home that had been violated, threatened, spray-painted with hate. Now it stood as a symbol of resistance, community, and the power of refusing to be intimidated. He thought about the scared veteran who'd driven home frantically a year ago, desperate to protect his wife. He thought about the rage he'd felt, the desire for revenge that he'd had to channel into something productive. He thought about every skill he'd learned in the military, all the training in violence and combat, and how he'd transformed those skills into tools for justice and protection. A Navy SEAL is trained to be a weapon, he reflected. But the most powerful weapon isn't violence, it's purpose. It's using your skills for something bigger than yourself. It's turning training meant for war into tools for peace. His phone buzzed with a text from Nicole. Come to bed, warrior. Tomorrow we have 3 families coming for security consultations. James smiled. The fight wasn't over. It never would be, really. There would always be people who spread hate, who threaten others, who try to use fear as a weapon. But now there was also a network of trained, determined people ready to stand against them, legally, effectively, together. He stood, stretched, and took one last look at the quiet suburban street. A year ago, this place had been hostile territory. Now it was home, real home, the kind worth fighting for. 2 years after that night when 12 gang members walked into a trap they never saw coming, James sat in a conference room at the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. Around the table were FBI officials, civil rights leaders, veterans organization representatives, and community activists from across the country. They were there because of him, because of what he'd started in his own living room. The director of the FBI's Civil Rights Division stood at the head of the table. Mr. Bryant, your methods have been analyzed by our behavioral science unit, our tactical teams, and our legal department. What you accomplished that night wasn't just brave, it was revolutionary. You created a blueprint for community-based hate crime prevention that works within the legal system while being more effective than traditional law enforcement approaches. James felt uncomfortable with the praise. I was just protecting my family. You were doing more than that, and you know it, the director continued. The evidence collection techniques you used, the coordination with local police, the use of veteran networks for surveillance and documentation, all of it has been studied and adapted. We want to make it official. The FBI is launching a nationwide program based on your model. We're calling it the Community Defense Initiative. Over the next hour, they outlined the program. The FBI would provide training, resources, and coordination for community groups using Shield and Protect's methods. Veterans across the country would be recruited and trained to help protect vulnerable neighborhoods. Law enforcement agencies would be given new protocols for working with civilian security networks. We estimate this program could reduce hate crimes by 30 to 40% in participating communities. The director said, That's thousands of families who won't have to go through what you and Dr. Bryant experienced. After the meeting, James walked through Washington streets, thinking about how far things had come. His phone had been buzzing all day with messages from the Shield and Protect network. The organization now had chapters in 43 states with over 2,000 trained volunteers, most of them veterans who'd found a new mission in civilian life. Rodriguez called as James was heading back to his hotel. Boss, you see the news? The story about the DC meeting is everywhere. We've got 600 new volunteer applications just today. Can we handle that growth? We'll need to expand the training program, but yeah, we can do it. Thompson and I have been working on a curriculum that can be taught online with in-person certification workshops. We can scale this. That evening, James video called Nicole. She was at home, their 2-year-old daughter playing in the background. They'd had a baby 10 months after the trial, a little girl they named Hope. The name felt right given everything they'd been through. "How was Washington?" Nicole asked, bouncing Hope on her knee. "Overwhelming. The FBI wants to take our model nationwide. This thing we started is becoming bigger than I ever imagined. You sound tired." "I am. But it's good tired. The kind that comes from doing something meaningful." He watched Hope giggle at something on TV. "I keep thinking about her future, the world she'll grow up in. Maybe it'll be a little bit safer because of what we're doing." "It already is," Nicole said softly. "I saw 3 new families this week at the clinic. All of them moved into previously hostile neighborhoods that now have Shield and Protect chapters. They're not afraid because they know their neighbors have their backs. That's directly because of you." The impact was visible everywhere James looked. In his own neighborhood, the transformation was complete. What had been a place of cold shoulders and suspicious looks was now genuinely integrated. Block parties happened monthly. Kids of all backgrounds played together. Parents carpooled and watched each other's houses and genuinely cared about their neighbors. The local high school had started a youth program based on Shield and Protect's principles. Students learned about civil rights, community protection, legal activism, and standing up against hate. The program was so successful that the state education board was considering making it part of the standard curriculum. But James knew that success brought new challenges. 3 months after the Washington meeting, he received a troubling call from Thompson, who was running the West Coast operations. "We've got a situation in Oregon. One of our volunteers got overly aggressive with a suspected hate group member. No violence, but he crossed some lines with surveillance. The local police are concerned, and honestly, so am I. We need to reinforce the boundaries of what we do and don't do." James flew to Portland the next day. He met with the volunteer, a Marine veteran named Kevin who'd been trying to protect a mosque that had received threats. Kevin had followed suspects to their homes, taken photos of their families, and generally stepped over the line from protection into intimidation. "I was just trying to help," Kevin said defensively. "These guys were planning something. I could feel it." James sat down across from him. "I understand the impulse. I really do. But the moment we become the intimidators, we lose everything. We're not vigilantes. We're not operating outside the law. The second we cross that line, we're no different from the people we're trying to stop. But what if my caution means someone gets hurt? Then we work with the police to prevent it legally. That's the whole point of what we've built. Yes, it's frustrating. Yes, sometimes it feels too slow. But the system works if we work with it. The 47 arrests from our network? All of them stuck because we did everything by the book. Not one conviction has been overturned on appeal because our evidence was clean. The conversation was difficult but necessary. James implemented new protocols after that incident. More training on legal boundaries, better oversight of field operations, regular check-ins with law enforcement partners to ensure Shield and Protect volunteers weren't overstepping. The second anniversary of the attack brought unexpected recognition. James was invited to speak at the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. He almost declined, feeling uncomfortable with the spotlight, but Nicole convinced him to go. "Your story matters," she told him. "Not just what you did, but how you did it. People around the world are facing the same hate, the same threats. They need to know there are ways to fight back without becoming the thing they're fighting against." Standing before the International Assembly, James kept his remarks simple and direct. He told the story of that Saturday afternoon when his wife was attacked. He described the rage and fear he'd felt. He explained how he'd channeled those emotions into a systematic, legal response that had stopped not just his attackers, but an entire network. "I'm not special," he concluded. "I had skills from military service, yes, but the principles work for anyone. Document everything. Work with authorities. Build community networks. Stay within the law. These aren't complicated ideas, but they're powerful when applied consistently. Hate thrives in isolation and silence. Community and documentation destroy it." The speech was translated into 40 languages and shared around the world. James received messages from people in South Africa, India, France, Brazil, and dozens of other countries, all facing similar challenges and finding hope in his story. But perhaps the most meaningful change happened closer to home. Derek Mason, the gang leader serving 25 years, requested a meeting with James from prison. Detective Foster called to relay the request. He says he wants to apologize. Could be genuine, could be working an angle for early parole consideration. "What do you want to do?" James thought about it for a week before deciding. He drove to the federal prison with Nicole, both of them silent during the 2-hour drive. They sat across from Derek in a visiting room, separated by bulletproof glass. Derek looked different. The spiderweb tattoo was still there, but something in his face had changed. Prison either breaks people or forces them to confront themselves. James couldn't tell yet which had happened here. "I don't expect forgiveness," Derek started, his voice quiet. "What I did was evil. I knew it was wrong even when I was doing it, but I'd been raised in that hate, surrounded by it, and I didn't know any other way to be." Nicole leaned forward. "You had a choice. Everyone has a choice, and you're right. And I made the wrong one over and over. I hurt people because of how they looked, where they came from. I terrorized families, destroyed people's sense of safety. I can't take that back." James studied the man across from him. "So why ask for this meeting?" "Because I'm in here with time to think. A lot of time. And I started reading, started learning about the people I hated, started seeing them as human instead of threats. I've been taking college classes, working with the prison counselor. I don't know if I can ever really change what I believed for so long, but I'm trying." Derek pulled out a folder of papers. "I wrote down everything I knew about the network. Names, locations, methods, future plans I'd heard about. I gave it all to the FBI 6 months ago. It led to 17 more arrests. I know it doesn't make up for anything, but maybe it prevents someone else from getting hurt." James and Nicole left the prison with complicated feelings. Forgiveness wasn't simple. Justice wasn't always clear-cut. Derek would still serve his full sentence, but maybe he'd come out different. Maybe his information had saved lives. There were no perfect answers, just human beings trying to do better. 5 years after the attack, Shield and Protect had evolved beyond anything James had imagined. The organization now had a national office, a board of directors, and a yearly budget of $3 million from grants and donations. They'd helped protect over 12,000 families and had contributed to 460 arrests related to hate crimes. But James was most proud of the smaller victories. The Muslim family in Texas who could attend mosque without fear because their neighborhood had organized protection watches. The immigrant family in Wisconsin whose children could walk to school safely because Shield and Protect volunteers monitored the route. The elderly black couple in Georgia who didn't have to sell their family home of 40 years because the community rallied around them when threats came. Nicole's counseling program had expanded too. She'd written a book about healing from hate crimes that became required reading in psychology programs nationwide. She trained therapists in trauma-informed care for victims of racial violence. Her clinic treated hundreds of patients every year, helping them rebuild their sense of safety and belonging. Their daughter Hope grew up in a neighborhood that felt more like a large family. She played with children of every background, never knowing that 5 years earlier this same street had been hostile territory. To her, diversity was just normal. Protection was just neighbors looking out for each other. That was the world James and Nicole had fought to create. On the 5th anniversary of the attack, the neighborhood held a celebration. Not to commemorate the violence, but to celebrate what had grown from it. Over 300 people attended, including Detective Foster, Agent Carson, James's old SEAL teammates, families they'd helped, and volunteers from across the state. The mayor gave a speech about how the community had become a model for integration and mutual protection. The police chief talked about the partnership between law enforcement and civilian networks. The FBI director sent a video message about how the Community Defense Initiative had reduced hate crimes by 37% in participating areas. But the moment that stuck with James came from an unexpected source. A teenage girl named Ashley stood up to speak. She was the daughter of one of the families threatened 3 years earlier. Shield and Protect had helped document the threats and work with police to arrest the perpetrators. "I was 12 when men came to our house and told us to leave because we were Latino," Ashley said, her voice steady. "I was terrified. I wanted my parents to move away, to go somewhere safe. But Mr. Bryant and his team helped us stay. They showed us we didn't have to run. Now I'm 15 and I'm not scared anymore. And when I grow up, I want to do what he does. I want to help families like mine." That evening, as the celebration wound down and families headed home, James sat on his porch with Nicole, Hope asleep between them. The same porch where he'd stood 5 years ago, watching his violated home being investigated by police. The same street where gang members had planned to burn his house down. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd just moved away like they demanded? Nicole asked. Sometimes. We'd probably be fine, safe somewhere else, living quiet lives. But all these other families wouldn't be safe. The network would still be operating. Derek would still be out there terrorizing people. James nodded. I learned something in the military that I forgot for a while after I got out. Running from a fight doesn't make you safe, it just means the fight will find someone else. Standing your ground, using your skills, building something bigger than yourself, that's what creates real security. Rodriguez walked over, the last to leave as usual. Hell of a party, boss. You know what's funny? 5 years ago, I flew here thinking we were going to have one night of action and then head home. Now I'm running 3 state chapters and training coordinators every month. You turned us all into community organizers. I turned you into protectors. That's what we always were, we just found a new mission. After Rodriguez left, James received a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of a family in front of their new home, all of them smiling. The message read, "Shield and protect chapter in our neighborhood. Finally felt safe enough to buy a house. Thank you for showing us how to stand up." James showed the photo to Nicole. That's what it's about. Not the awards or the recognition or the programs. That family living without fear. Hope stirred in her sleep and James carefully carried her inside to her bedroom. He looked at her peaceful face, thinking about the world she'd inherit. It wouldn't be perfect. Hate wouldn't disappear. But maybe, just maybe, people would have better tools to fight it. Better communities to support them. Better examples of how to turn fear into action and action into change. Later that night, lying in bed, Nicole asked the question that had been on both their minds. Do you think we're done? Has Shield and Protect grown enough that we can step back? James thought about it. The organization was strong, with capable leaders in every region. They'd built systems that worked. They'd trained thousands of volunteers. The model was proven and replicable. I think we could step back from the day-to-day operations, he said slowly. Let the next generation of leaders take over. But completely done? No, this became our life's work the moment those men kicked in our door. We can evolve our role, but we'll never really leave it behind. Good, Nicole said, settling against him. Because I'm not ready to stop either. Too many families still need help. Too many communities still need to learn how to protect themselves. The next morning, James woke early and went for a run through his neighborhood. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He passed houses where he knew the families, where everyone from every background lived side by side. He passed the small memorial garden the community had built, honoring victims of hate crimes with a simple message. We remember. We stand together. His phone buzzed with morning messages. A new Shield and Protect chapter launching in Montana. A family in New Jersey requesting help with threatening neighbors. A veteran in Louisiana wanting to start volunteer training. The work never stopped, but that was okay. Important work never really finished, it just evolved. James ran past the spot where the gang's truck had parked 5 years ago, preparing for their attack. Now a young mother was loading her kids into a minivan for school, waving cheerfully at neighbors. That's what victory looked like. Not dramatic moments or big ceremonies, but ordinary people living safely in their homes, not having to think about whether they belong. He completed his run and stood in front of his house, breathing hard, looking at the home that had become a symbol. Fresh paint covered any trace of the spray-painted hate. Flowers bloomed in Nicole's garden. Hope's toys were scattered in the yard. It was just a house, but it represented something bigger. It represented the choice to stand rather than run, to organize rather than fear, to build community rather than accept isolation. James's phone rang. It was Agent Carson with news about another hate group network that Shield and Protect volunteers had helped expose. 42 members arrested across 7 states, prevented attacks on dozens of families, more lives saved, more communities protected. Your model works, James, Carson said. 5 years of data proves it. Communities with active Shield and Protect chapters see hate crimes drop by an average of 41%. That's not just correlation, it's causation. What you built actually changes things. After the call, James sat on his porch steps watching his neighborhood come alive with morning activity. Kids heading to school, adults leaving for work, dogs being walked, coffee being poured on porches. Normal life, the kind that people deserve to live without fear. Nicole joined him with 2 mugs of coffee. They sat together in comfortable silence watching their world. The world they'd fought for. The world they'd protected. the world they'd helped build. You know what I think about sometimes? Nicole said. Those 3 men who attacked me that first day. They thought they were starting something. They thought they were going to scare us away and send a message. They did start something, James replied, just not what they intended. They created a movement. They proved that standing up to hate works. They accidentally built the very thing they were trying to prevent. A community united across differences. James smiled. That's the thing about hate. It's powerful, but it's also fragile. It can't survive real community. It can't survive people refusing to be intimidated. It can't survive documentation and justice and neighbors protecting neighbors. Hope ran outside in her pajamas, demanding breakfast. Nicole scooped her up and they all went inside together. Just a family starting their day. Just people living their lives. Just humans being human in a house that had become a home again. And somewhere across the country in 43 states, 2,000 volunteers were waking up to do the same work. Protecting families. Building communities. Standing up to hate. Using skills learned in service to their country to now serve their neighborhoods. Creating safety not through violence but through presence, documentation, coordination, and the simple, powerful act of refusing to let fear win. That was James Bryant's legacy. Not the dramatic night when he caught 12 gang members in a trap. Not the trials or the convictions or the awards. His legacy was the ordinary miracle of families living safely in homes they chose, in neighborhoods that welcomed them, protected by communities that valued every member. It was the legacy of turning a violent attack into a movement for change, of transforming military skills into civilian protection, of proving that one person standing up could inspire thousands to do the same. It was the legacy of home, real home, for everyone.